Well, Tyler, good to catch up with you. We are almost through 2 full weeks of Notre Dame fall camp. As you look back at the first 12 days, what do you think is the biggest storyline that has developed?
I mean, there's plenty to choose from, and that's not unique to this camp. That happens every single year, happens at every program across the country. But as I sit and reflect on what we've seen now in a handful of practices that the media has been able to be on hand for, I'm just kind of over the moon. And I think Notre Dame fans should be over the moon that Riley Leonard is healthy and looking good. And the storyline that dominated spring ball is not the same one that's dominating fall camp. It's the reverse of that. It's the inverse. It's that he looks good, he's healthy, he has not sat out a single rep. Notre Dame on social media puts out a video last week, Darren, and he's pressing X or whatever button makes you jump into the end zone on College Football 25 on Xbox and PlayStation. Like, he looks good. And I said on Saturday, I put this on my own social media, that I thought he was throwing the deep ball better than we have seen in the first 5 practices. So the arm looks good. Gino Guidugli, the quarterback's coach, one of the first questions that we got to ask him on Saturday was, what has sort of surprised you now that you've gotten to see Riley Leonard, like I said, actually practice and look good in these practices? And Gino Guidugli said the arm strength. He can really whip it out there, the short throws, the long throws, all of that. So we know what he can do as a runner if he's healthy. And like I said, we saw that in that social media clip that Notre Dame put out. But I think the arm looks good, just his mechanics, the way he's carrying himself. This is the senior quarterback that Notre Dame went out and got out of the transfer portal, and he's looking the part so far.
It's really interesting to hear your analysis on Leonard, because I feel like he has checked some of the boxes that you had in regard to Riley Leonard at Duke, going back, watching every single one of his snaps at Duke. I think some of the things that stood out at times, ball placement, decision-making. I know it's fall practice. It's not under the bright lights as of yet, but these seem to be positive steps.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what Gino Guidugli said with the arm looking good. And that's what you said, Darren. Like, when you asked me a couple months ago, what does Riley Leonard have to do in fall camp to show you that he's ready for this and that he can lead Notre Dame to 11-1, 12-0 college football playoff, whatever it is? It's got to hit all of those throws. And we haven't seen a whole lot of practice where, like, let's put it this way. I haven't seen enough to be like, okay, he's definitely better than he was at Duke in those areas, but I haven't seen anything that tells me he's not going to be good. And for Notre Dame, that's exactly where you want to be. And we have to introduce this into the conversation as well, Darren. The wide receivers are looking the part as well. And in spring ball, we didn't get to see that because Bo Collins wasn't suiting up. Jaden Harrison got hurt. Jaden Thomas got hurt. Heck, Cam Williams, I mean, that was a depth guy in spring ball. Even he gets hurt to a point where he's not practicing. So you've got all 11 guys on the field with Riley Leonard. I think that's been so important that, Chris Mitchell looks good. And Jaden Greathouse, he's a guy that we're probably not talking enough about. I think he looks like the guy that went out there and caught 2 touchdowns against Navy. And we didn't really get to see that for much of the season, really mid-September on last year. So the receivers are helping out Riley Leonard. Riley Leonard is helping out himself. And it's all, building up to August 31st and beyond to where maybe Notre Dame is going to have a really good offense. And I will say, obviously, Mike Denbrock is a part of this as well. He's one of the loudest guys out there on the field at these practices, talking to the quarterbacks, talking to the receivers, offensive line, everything. Nothing goes unnoticed, no stone unturned, with Mike Denbrock. And it's been really impressive to just kind of see all these elements of the Irish offense come together. And maybe it's going to be a good unit this year.
Let me stick with the passing theme, because I think the expectation was that Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison would be battling for playing time in the slot. And that still could be the case. I think you're going to see Mike Denbrock do the best he can to get the best players on the field, regardless of position. Do you think there's a major push right now that Jordan Faison could be a starting outside wide receiver for this football team? Because we're seeing out there a lot.
Yeah, he's actually kind of taking, I would say, first team reps here and there. Like he's getting Chris Mitchell off the field at times at the field receiver position. And that is very impressive, considering Chris Mitchell, right up there with Micah Gilbert, was probably the best wide receiver that Notre Dame had in spring ball. And obviously Jordan Faison was not a part of spring ball because he was helping the lacrosse team win a national championship, go back to back. So yeah, Jordan Faison very much back into the fold and looking good. And it's funny, we're filming for some of the B-roll that we use on these here YouTube videos that we're making right now. And it seems like I will hone in on a receiver. And I have an example where I kind of watched Jaden Greathouse go in motion. And I'm like, okay, I want to see what Jaden Greathouse does on this snap. And then all of a sudden, Jordan Faison butts into the frame, and he's the one catching the ball on the pass. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, maybe I should have followed Jordan Faison. That's probably what we're going to see this year from Faison. What he did in 7 games last year, Darren, was no fluke. He was Notre Dame's best wide receiver in the second half of that season, Sun Bowl MVP. We know all the statistics. He's a real wide receiver. He's a real player for Notre Dame this year. And if you're taking Chris Mitchell off the field, like I said, that's a pretty big thing because, one, we thought Jordan Faison was only going to come out of the slot given that he's 5'10" and 180 pounds. But he can go out there and win reps on the outside and beat guys downfield. He can beat them with the short routes as well. So, I mean, it's almost like he's only a sophomore and we're already taking him for granted. We're wanting to talk about other players like Chris Mitchell, like Micah Gilbert, who, by the way, has struggled a little bit in fall camp with some pass catching issues. But we need to be talking about Jordan Faison because he's legit. He's a good player. And yes, Darren, you are going to see him not just in the slot competing with Jaden Greathouse, but you're going to see him outside as well. I think Mike Denbrock likes that look.
Our Notre Dame football update with Tyler Horka, the Notre Dame football beat reporter, Blue and Gold Illustrated. Check out his work at blueandgold.com. Charles Jagusah goes down with a pectoral injury. Joe Rudolph has elected to move Tosh Baker from right tackle to left tackle. Your analysis on the Irish offensive line, in particular the tackles, going into that first game against a Texas A&M defensive line that could be one of the best they'll face this year.
Yeah, I'll start on the right side, and I've been high on Emil Wagner since spring ball. I think he's one of the answers there. But then you hear what Joe Rudolph says the other week, and he said, Tosh Baker is our answer at left tackle. So in theory, you should say, okay, they got the left, they got the right. Those are your two guys. And then we show up to practice on a Saturday morning this past weekend, and all of a sudden Anthony Knapp is taking first team left tackle snaps, and Sam Pendleton is taking first team left guard snaps, and you're saying, oh no, here we go again. You get 2 weeks into fall camp. Remember last year, Darren, when we thought we knew who the starters were, Andrew Kristofic, Billy Schrauth. No. It's Pat Coogan. It's Rocco Spindler. I don't think this was to that degree. I think this was Joe Rudolph saying, hey, we have all these questions. Let me just kind of shake this up a little bit more and see how you respond, Tosh Baker. Let me see how you respond, Billy Schrauth and all these different guys who you're like, oh no, Pat Coogan being one of those guys that he starts all 13 games last year. Now you don't know if he's going to start one game this year. He's taking center snaps on Saturday. So all that to say, the Notre Dame offensive line, we knew it was a question mark coming into fall camp, Darren. It's still very much a question mark now because of the Charles Jagusah injury. At the end of the day, I don't see how you start a true freshman in Anthony Knapp, or you can say Styles Prescott or Gerby Lambert. Like, I don't see either three of those guys because those are the ones behind Tosh Baker right now. Those are your three guys. And maybe Ty Chan, you can kind of put him in that conversation as well. But Darren, you have Tosh Baker, who has started, I think, around a half dozen games in his career. And I've always said, if that's all he could start in the first 4 or 5 years or 4 years, is he really a 13-game starter in year 5? Does it click like that overnight? There's that part of the conversation. And there's also the part of the conversation where Joe Alt's the number 5 pick in the NFL draft, and Blake Fisher is a second rounder, probably a first rounder if he gets to play his entire freshman year. That's what Tosh Baker was playing behind. So is he that good? No. Is he good enough to start against Texas A&M? Probably. And I think you do see him start because, like I said, the other alternatives are some freshmen and Ty Chan, who has not played a lot of football in actual games in his Notre Dame career. So I think you see Tosh Baker on the left side of the line against Texas A&M. And then I started this conversation with Emil Wagner on the right. Like he is penned in at this point. Jagusah going down, you have to have one of those two guys play the right. Wagner was ahead of Baker at the beginning of camp when Jagusah was healthy. So he's going to be your right tackle.